Thank you all so much for being here today. I feel like I age regressed to the early days of radio, and I just want to say we're broadcasting live here from beautiful Santa Cruz, California. It's a gorgeous sunny day. The waves are pumping at the lane, the surfers are out, and I hear it's good waves. And I want to say hi to all of you and thank you so much for being here. Well, the kind of idea of this last couple of hours, having finished this amazing conference from my perspective, is going to be around training the ego and tuning the heart, which really were kind of some of the threads that seemed to kind of come through me as I participated in this conference. And I tried really hard to participate and be available to as many of the offerings as I could. And first of all, I want to say what an amazing trip it was down memory lane with friends and colleagues, relatives actually, who were presenting, and how blown away I was at the richness and the depth of the presentations. So my idea was to, kind of pull some threads together that we can use from the higher level of NLP in terms of our discipline, in terms of our community, and kind of looking at these different descriptions of NLP that have developed over the last bunch of years, about 35, 40 years. So if you can just take a moment and just kind of find that still place in yourself. I know, when Robert started the conference 10 or 11 days ago, he talked about this idea of centering, kind of connecting ourselves to the earth and feeling the energy and allowing the energy to come up through us, to kind of find that place. I know when Art Geiser talked about NLP and shamanism, he talked about that idea of holding that beautiful golden ball in front of you and feeling the sense of those magnets below you and magnets above you, and that whole process of clearing. I know when Penny and James presented on clean language, but also how distilled they could take the idea of something like the meta model and what very few clean questions that they could ask another human being that would create the optimal opportunity for that person to bring the meaning to the conversation out of their own world, out of their own deep structure. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these descriptions, and I want people to kind of sit in the landscape of your NLP knowledge and notice what enrichments have come to you over the last week. And I think that the beauty of this last week for me too has also been the fact that this is a fractile of our community. This is what our whole community is like really in its core. This quality, this desire to share, this willingness to be open and share. I think one of the most amazing things about my history in NLP for myself has been the great generosity of people like Milton Erickson and Virginia Satir, Gregory Bateson, and people like that along the lines who have so generously and willingly given us their time, given us their expertise for nothing, actually, basically for nothing. So I want to kind of be in that space a little bit with you all. I think it also points to this idea of who we are now and who we're becoming, not only as the individuals that we are, but also with respect to the field and the community that we all share a love for, that we all find that's the pattern that connects is this crazy thing called NLP or neuro-linguistic programming or whatever we call it. And then the importance of being present and embodied, and that's going to reflect back to practices. So the idea of going training the ego, what have you learned given all the beautiful, beautiful presentations? I mean, we know for sure that this thread of modeling has been an absolute big, bright, silver, gold, rainbow, amazing thread that has gone through with Xavier modeling relationship and team. I'm thinking of those Maori guys. They scared the heck out of me for sure. I was thinking of, you know, the modeling that he did, the modeling that Frauke did, the beautiful leaders that Frauke modeled and shared some of those patterns. I thought of the models that Robert talked about as well, and Michael Grinder in that amazing workshop that he did yesterday, you know, taking us back into that space in our NLP education of those representational systems, those physiological cues, and really, really tightly noticing what very small changes can happen and how the whole meaning of a conversation can change based on that. I think that was quite amazing. So that's kind of going to be the spirit, and I hope that not only is there you kind of become more and more aware of the richness, but also become you know, learn some more skills that you can add to your repertoire. Now, one thing that occurred to me right away was, you know, this idea that when Robert started the whole conference, he talked about this idea of resilience, and he took that idea of resilience, a great NLP nominalization, and began to stretch it inside, outside, and go, what does that mean to truly be resilient? And what does that mean in terms of what kind of state I have to be in? What kind of practices do I have to develop? What kind of spirit do I have to have in terms of being willing to be open and be able to hold the difficult feelings when they happen? So that, like Michael Hall says, I can then enter into this kind of a state of flow. I know the emotions that are going to come. I know they're going to move through me. That Robert talked about managing space. You know, how I have to manage the space between these brains. You know, the reptile brain, the human brain, and the mammalian brain, and that all of this starts to come into play in terms of the threads that are moving through all of these beautiful presentations and the learning there. So I looked at some of these shared patterns of success. I mean, these are people, you know, like Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, who was a very successful gentleman who grew up at a ranch in Mexico watching dogs on his grandfather's farm, and created an entire success story and television series and books based on his ability to coach the people about how to deal with their animals. And they call him the dog whisperer. Many actors and actresses as well, and these are some of the shared patterns. You know, dedication, intelligent persistence, community, listening, telling a story, being able to test, you know, is what you're doing making a difference? What are your feedback loops? Managing your emotions, having a sense of wanting to continually evolve yourself, and being patient and happy. Now, we know how to do that thanks to Fran, because I know that she just went right before. So what occurred to me from an NLP perspective and as a modeler is how you could take any one of these great nominalizations and begin yourself to turn it inside out with respect to NLP and your basis of knowledge. So that was another thing that kind of came. That was related to modeling. And, you know, I just put these few names up here only because they were so intertwined. You know, when Mike Grinder was modeling, he was modeling a certain thing, but he was modeling. When Heidi talked about something as distressing and as severe as young people dying because of eating disorders, that her commitment to the application of NLP to that health possibility was just amazing. In the world of coaching with Pennington James and with Xavier and with Frauke and Frank Puslik and Robert, all of them in terms of modeling leaders and leadership, whether it be self-leaders or whether it be other leaders in the world. And gracias to Vasily for reminding us that we have to take care of our planet, that we can make a difference with awareness. So, I mean, these things were just threads that continued to go through me as we went on. And I haven't named them all, but just to kind of take a moment and reflect, on your learning from each of these people. Now, you know, when we think about the descriptions of NLP, I mean, first of all, we can say NLP has always been about the mind. It's always, that's what it's always been about. We had, you know, that idea of the classic code was the cognitive mind. It's all about, you know, the representational systems and submodalities and how I create, and language, and how I create experience. I create my map. The new coding started to move more, from my perspective, into more the mind of the body. This kind of comes out in the somatic syntax, for example, that kind of came around the same time as the new coding, where we started to talk more about the body. Although the body was always implicit, just as Michael Grinder was pointing out, you know, to be able to calibrate, for example, and notice those differences. I know one of the things that I thought about was we used to talk a lot about those differences between what happens when you're saying yes. Somebody comes to the PTA meeting at your school and they want you to bake cookies, and you're signaling them, yeah, I understand that, you know, you want me to bake some cookies, but what they're picking up by that signal is, yes, you're going to bake the cookies. And so there's always been kind of an interest, I think, also in NLP, but it got lost along the way, of looking at those differences that make a difference. So what's the difference, for example, between fright and stage fright? Because they're really not the same animals in us. You know, as Milton Erickson used to say, if you see a hungry-looking lion walk through the door and, you know, looks at you like you're a pork chop, something happens, it mobilizes inside of you. That's called fright. Even though some of the neurology for stage fright overlaps with fright, we don't mistake it. So we can make a discrimination. In the third generation, you know, it's more an energetic connection. It's more an energetic description, and there's also this mind that lives in this field, that lives in this pathway between us as human beings. But all of these have had the importance of being flexible, of being resilient, of having choice, and of course of having an awareness or a metacognition of structure, and that it's a means to set us free, that it allows us to open ourselves up to a larger system in order to rebalance ourselves, to recorrect ourselves. These three generations to me are the same as three descriptions. I know Robert and I both use the word three generations, but sometimes people mistake that as generations of people, but that's not what it's really referring to. It's really referring to these three different descriptions. The descriptions as people in NLP shifted their attention into spaces that had not yet been described well enough that you felt like you could really pass it on, pass a model on. I mean, that's the whole idea of NLP. The whole spirit is to build those models. So all three generations have to do with states and strategies. Some of the generations were more problem focused. So in the early days, we talked about, you know, there's kind of three levels of NLP. You know, the first level is sort of problem solving, first order change, behavioral change. Then there's another order, which is kind of second order change, that gets into the area of beliefs and beliefs about what's possible for me as a human being, and also what roles are possible in terms of my identity as a human being. And then there was sort of a third level, which was considered generative development or generative change. And I think we're sort of now in a place in our history of NLP that we can really bring all those aspects together. You know, the generative development, which is kind of really where the third generation is focused now, or the third description is focused on generative development more. And maybe a little less on problem focus, but all of us use NLP, I'm sure, you know, to deal with problems and to understand them, and to understand that in every problem there's a key to solution if we can kind of put enough space around it for there to be an emergence of knowledge from the deeper self. One of the things that we've had to do in, you know, over these years is now we've had to digest and find a way to put these descriptions together in a way because they relate to each other in a very intimate way. I can't go, oh, well, the first generation's not any good, the second generation's great, and the third one's the best. It isn't about that. It's about how do they articulate, because of the focus of attention being on at one point, you know, my intellect and my cognitive mind, and at another point being on the space in between me and another person, or at another time it's focused on particularly solving a problem. So being able to kind of interweave and bring these descriptions together has now really become, I think, in my mind, a part of mastery of NLP. Mastery of NLP, people are able to really master those three descriptions and understand how they articulate with each other and the importance of all of them. It reminded me just in this moment of that beautiful story of the two hands that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. And I'm thinking about this in two ways, not only about the beauty of all these descriptions or these generations, but also when we get so infatuated with a personality, you know, we don't want personality cults in NLP, but sometimes they happen, or one person's a good guy and one person's a bad guy, or this particular process is better than that particular process. And he was kind of really talking about this funny thing that happens just even between the mind and the body, you know, or between the left hand and the right hand. And he tells a beautiful story about my right hand has written many, many beautiful poems. My left hand hasn't written any. But my right hand doesn't say to my left hand, you're useless, you know, you can't do nothing right. You know? It doesn't do that. And by the same token, he says if he was putting a picture up in his house one day and he hit his thumb with the hammer, you know, his right hand hit his left thumb with the hammer. And he said the immediate response of his left hand was to go to his left hand, to hold it gently, to give it a lot of love and affection and care. It wasn't to go, oh, I think I'll just hit you again if you get in the way. And the left hand didn't go, hey, every time you come around and hang up a picture, you hit me with the hammer. No. And so I think it's that kind of attitude that we also have to sort of sustain in our world. And this reflects, you know, it also reflects deeper values in us as human beings, but also maybe the kind of values that we want to reflect as a community. And I just put one of my favorites there, you know, to reflect, to be the change that you want to see in the world. Because all of them allow us to hopefully reflect our values. And I think that gets more clear as it gets easier for me personally to reflect my deeper values as I have a more and more intimate and rich knowledge of NLP and how it connects to other parts of the world, really. I wanted to go back really quickly again now because I think we can kind of move into more the meat, kind of the meat of the presentation in terms of giving, you know, offering you some ideas that you can now fly with. You know, Robert talked about coaching versus Robert talked about coaching and crashing, you know, and this is part of one way to think about third generation, but I just want you to kind of hold these ideas as we kind of stretch out into other places. That, you know, we're moving along in life, everything's great, and then challenges happen, you know, stuff happens. Or as we say in California, shift happens because we have earthquakes. Challenges present themselves, you know, so things are always happening. Too many things are happening too fast. Or, oh my God, nothing's happening quick enough. Things are not progressing quickly enough. I get scared. I don't know what's going to happen next. That fear of the unknown. Things are just not familiar. I don't feel safe. Or I feel like I might not be able to stay vulnerable if something happens. I think just all these various things of life come along and try to pull us away from this kind of state of grace is what I call it. And what happens is, as Robert says, it plunges us into these unhelpful survival strategies where just like when the mammalian brain clicks in, it goes fight, attack, resist. It means, you know, run, get the hell out of Dodge, as we say. And that can be, you know, that can be run physically. It could be run spiritually. I could close down emotionally. I could drink. I could, you know, I could do drugs. I could, you know, become addicted to exercise to the point that I endanger myself. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to escape. Or I can freeze. I can just get rigid. And what I wanted to do is just take a moment and connect this idea of these survival strategies with this metaphor of the 5 rhythms. I have a friend here, Jennifer Shapiro, who has danced the 5 rhythms, and when I mentioned this to her, yes, Camilla, Xavier is here. And when I mentioned it to her, she says, well, you know, we don't want to do any disservice or disrespect to Gabrielle Roth's life work, and I think that's absolutely right. That if I think of it as a metaphor, it is a hero's journey of the body, and it's something, a practice that you commit yourself to, you know, probably through maybe your lifetime. But to think about the metaphor as she uses the metaphor of the wave. I remember one of the presenters talked about using the wave, that was sort of their metaphor for training, and it is for mine too. But think about the wave in this way, that when we get caught in the wave, it's various aspects of the wave, it's like a survival strategy gets hooked in. So imagine the water, you're out in the ocean, and you're watching the water flow. And that's the first rhythm. And when the water is flowing, it's just moving. It's moving through life, just like if you're moving through your life. If the water's not flowing, the other side of that is stagnant. It's a little bit like freezing maybe, or not moving, or getting just caught like the rabbit in the headlights, but I can't move, I can't flow. It's just like water not moving, it's stagnant, and that's called, you know, kind of the shadow side when I get caught in that place. As the wave continues to flow, at some point it starts to create a definition. It starts to build and define itself as a wave. And that's just like the rhythm of what she calls staccato, where I'm defining who I am and I'm setting goals, and it has a certain rhythm and it has a certain da-da, 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 da-da. So I'm kind of creating this idea or this description or definition of who I am. And we all do that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And quite often we get called in work, in business, to go, okay, Judy, now you have to go be a business person over in Hong Kong. And I go, well, I don't know myself in that role. I have to define that. I have to find a way to move myself and pour myself into a new definition. And that doesn't happen all at once. And if I can't let go of the old definition, you see, then I can become really rigid. And that's being caught sort of in the shadow of that beautiful rhythm of staccato and definition, that if I can't let go of a definition for a new one, for an expanded one, or a new role for some reason, then I'll continue to hold on to that, and I'll get very rigid in my thinking. Well, interestingly enough, when I get really rigid there, the rest of the world continues to move on, it continues to change, and quite often it keeps calling me to this new place in my life, this new potential in my life. But I'll keep holding on, and the world gets a little bit more chaotic. It's harder and harder and harder to hold on to it. And so now I'm kind of now at the top of the wave, and I'm at a choice point. I either have to let go creatively, staying centered while I'm on that wave, or and I have to ride out the chaos, because when the wave is at its peak, it's where it's at its sort of most fragile place. Anything could happen there. If I get caught under the wave, that's kind of the shadow of that. I get confused. I get overwhelmed. It's unfamiliar. It gets scary. And that, kind of gives us an idea of how these flight, fight, escape, freeze, it gives us another way to think about the overall wave of life. If I can stay centered, if I can stay centered in the chaos, and I think this is what Vasily is pointing us towards, because look, we look around the world, we go, holy crikey, the world is in crisis. It is. It's in chaos. It's in crisis. And so all the more important for us to be able to look at that, but be able to look at that crisis from a centered position and to go, how does that feel, as he said? How does it make me feel? How do I feel about those feelings? And what is it that's being triggered in me that I need to bring forward in my own journey to make a difference? But if I can stay centered, then it allows me to get deeper into myself, to come up with that next beautiful, sort of shining, new self, new me, that's richer, that's deeper. And then to move to, and if I don't do that, then I just stay superficial. I don't enrich. It just remains kind of ho-hum. It's not really authentically you. Weaving means like when you're making a beautiful blanket, you use different threads and you put it on the loom and you weave together the threads to make a texture of a cloth or a rug or a blanket or a tapestry. So then if I get an opportunity to really have this new, richer, beautiful, shining expression of self, then as all the water runs up onto the beach, there's a pause, there's a moment of breath, there's a stillness, and then the water goes back and the wave begins to flow again. The water begins to flow again in the definition of a new wave. So I wanted you to be able to start to kind of connect through, not only from the level of the metaphor of the whole life journey, the small journeys that occur also in life, and how this is also a way to think about the hero's journey. And that it does point out those places that hook us into the, where I resist, where I hold on, where I just want to get away, and where I get rigid, where I freeze. Because all those levels become really relevant. What happens when this happens is I regress. As I said, I get inertia. I can't move. I can't, kind of get the motivation going. I get ambivalent. Should I do this? Should I do that? This is where I think it was Buddha that would say, if you have the problem of having to choose one way or another, always choose the third. And that's kind of my philosophy. Always find the third way. People have a difficulty letting go, and again, they get confusion or they have conflict. And so when we hit those hooks, when we hit those, as the Buddhists, or they would say in Tibet, the shempa, the hook, what happens inside of me is an indication that something can be brought forward. It's a place probably that I can grow from. And that's the fall, I contract, I react, I analyze, I call it analysis paralysis. When I go inside and start all that analysis, I separate from the outside world. And in that separation, I can say things and do things that are hurtful. And those can be little things, of course, and as we all know, those can be really horrific things. Yes, I'm human. All members of the human species have survival strategies. They're the deepest programs that we have. They're species programs. They're not, oh, I think I might have this or I think I won't. They're often, as Robert would say, very deep, very unconscious patterns, and we establish them probably at a very early age. Well, it's good to know we belong to a member of a species. And the question is, what else do we know how to do? If this is all true, and I think it is pretty accurate that as human beings we all find these moments on the wave of life where we're stagnant or we're feel rigid and the world is pulling us into something new, whether it's an invitation in a kind way or it's being teased out of it or whether it's being demanded out of us because something awful has happened in life or something wonderful has happened. I mean, being a grandma and bringing in a new child into the family, I mean, that it was a beautiful, beautiful beautiful moment in going, there's an expansion, but it's also the calling out of those special potentials. So as Robert's saying, well, look, then reality is what's more effective is that we can center and open and attend with awareness, that we can be, connect and hold. So these patterns have been repeated and repeated and repeated in many, many, many of the offerings and the presentations that I've heard. So what are the many ways that we can train our egos in a way? And we'll talk a little bit more about ego in a moment. What are the ways that we can tune our hearts? And one of those ways, is centering. One of those ways is that sense of really opening and connecting and creating the quality of relationship. I want to thank NLP Planet to Oleg and kind of an original vision and inspiration, and Lena, and for Sergey and Xavier and Camilla and Dario and the people who have really brought it to reality. Fantastico. It's just amazing.